For decades, it was a shadow war, a really complex dance of patronage and proxy fighters that just exploded out into the open. The relationship between Pakistan and Afghanistan, a bond that was, once forged in the fires of the Soviet-Afghan War. Well, it has officially shattered. Okay, let's dive right into this monumental shift.
And let's be clear, this wasn't some leaked memo or a quiet diplomatic whisper. No, this was a public declaration from Pakistan's Defense Minister Khwaja Asif, a statement that sent absolute shockwaves across the entire globe, signaling that the rules of the game in South Asia have just been violently rewritten. We are talking about a new and incredibly dangerous chapter.
In those words, they were backed up by immediate, overwhelming force. Pakistan launched Operation Ghazab-ul Haq, which translates to righteous fury. But these weren't just border skirmishes, not by a long shot. We're talking about precision airstrikes hitting the very heart of Afghanistan, the capital, Kabul, and the Taliban's spiritual headquarters in Kandahar. This is a full-scale assault.
The initial numbers that came out of Islamabad are just staggering. In the first 48 hours alone, Pakistan's information minister claimed that over 350 Taliban fighters had been neutralized and more than 130 of their military posts were completely destroyed. The scale of this initial assault, it's immense. So how did these once inseparable allies, the creator and the creation really, end up here? The story is more complex and shocking than you can possibly imagine, and you'll want to stay till the end because some shocking things I'm going to reveal in this explainer. Okay, let's get back to it.
First, we'll look at the declaration of war itself, then the anatomy of how things escalated so quickly. We'll get into the shocking reports of a downed Pakistani jet, the critical role India is playing, how the world is responding, and finally, what this all means for the end of Pakistan's most critical foreign policy doctrine. Let's start with how we even got here.
This declaration of war didn't just happen in a vacuum. It's really the explosive climax of a 6-month-long disintegration of the relationship, where, every diplomatic off-ramp was missed and every single warning was just ignored.
And right at the heart of this whole conflict is one group, the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, or the TTP. You can think of them as the Pakistani Taliban. For years, Pakistan has been accusing them of using Afghanistan as a safe haven to launch these deadly attacks back home. They've been demanding that the Afghan Taliban crack down on them. The problem? Well, the Afghan Taliban doesn't see the TTP as terrorists. They see them as ideological brothers.
This timeline really shows you just how fast everything fell apart. It all kicked off in late 2025 with TTP attacks inside Pakistan just spiraling out of control. So Pakistan retaliated with airstrikes on February 22nd, but the reported civilian casualties only inflamed the situation. Then, just 4 days later, the Taliban launched this absolutely stunning ground offensive, overrunning more than 50 Pakistani border posts. For Pakistan's military, this was a profound humiliation that led directly, the very next day, to that declaration of open war.
So, right after the declaration, Pakistan's information minister began this kind of data blitz to project strength. The initial claims were just huge. 352 Taliban killed.
Then they said 130 of their military posts were completely wiped off the map.
They also added the neutralization of 171 tanks and armored vehicles. And they said this was all achieved through 41 precision airstrikes across Afghanistan. The point here is that this data blitz was designed to send a crystal clear message. This is no longer a counterinsurgency. This is state-on-state warfare.
But just as Pakistan was trying to showcase its aerial dominance, a bombshell report emerged from Jalalabad, and it's a report that could change the entire narrative and trajectory of this war.
So the Afghan Ministry of Defense made this incredible claim. They had shot down a Pakistani fighter jet, and they had captured the pilot alive. Islamabad immediately denied it, of course, calling it Taliban propaganda. But this clash of narratives isn't just some sideshow. It's a critical front in this new war.
So why does this one incident matter so much? Well, if the Taliban's claim is true, it is a catastrophic failure for Pakistan. First, it would suggest the Taliban has sophisticated man-portable air defense systems or manpads. Second, a captured pilot is an enormous bargaining chip. For Pakistan's military headquarters in Rawalpindi, what they call GHQ, this is an absolute nightmare scenario that could force them to either de-escalate in humiliation or double down with even more destructive force.
Okay, let's pivot to the regional powers. Because for Pakistan's arch-rival India, this war on its western flank is a complex, double-edged sword. And you can bet New Delhi is playing its hand very, very carefully.
Officially, India has condemned Pakistan's airstrikes and called for respect for Afghanistan's territorial integrity. Now that might sound surprising, right? But it actually reflects a major strategic shift. Over the last year, India has been quietly engaging with the Taliban regime, providing aid and building bridges. By condemning Pakistan, India is positioning itself as the stable, reliable partner in the region.
Pakistan, of course, has a completely different story. It claims its airstrikes aren't just targeting the TTP, but also Indian-sponsored proxies, like Baloch insurgent groups who they allege are operating from Afghan soil. It's basically their attempt to frame this war as a response to Indian interference.
And this, right here, is Pakistan's ultimate nightmare realized. They are now fighting an active, hot war on their western border with Afghanistan, while also having to maintain this massive military presence on their eastern border with India. And all of this is happening while their economy is in absolute shambles. The real question is, how long can Pakistan possibly sustain a two-front security crisis in the middle of a catastrophic economic one?
Now, this conflict isn't just a regional affair. The great powers of the world are watching with extreme concern as this, quote, brotherhood of blood dissolves into open warfare, threatening to destabilize the entire region. So let's break down where they all stand. China is maybe the most frustrated, calling for an immediate ceasefire to protect its billions invested in the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC. The United States has voiced diplomatic support for Pakistan because, well, a weaker Taliban is a net positive for them, but they're terrified of a refugee crisis. Meanwhile, Iran and Russia have offered to mediate, mostly because they are deeply concerned the conflict will create a power vacuum that could be filled by their common enemy, ISIS-K.
Which brings us to the core conclusion of this entire crisis. This war represents the total, complete, and catastrophic failure of a Pakistani foreign policy doctrine that has defined the country for decades.
That policy is called strategic depth. For generations, the Pakistani military's #1 goal was to ensure a friendly, controllable, frankly, a puppet government in Kabul. The idea was that this would give them strategic maneuvering room, or depth, in a potential war with their main rival, India.
And here is the great, tragic irony of it all. The puppets have now become the predators. The Taliban, a movement nurtured and protected for years by Pakistan's own intelligence agency, the ISI, has now become its #1 military adversary. The policy hasn't just failed, it has backfired in the most spectacular way imaginable, jeopardizing not only Pakistan's internal stability, but also its standing with key allies like China. And so we're left with one final, sobering question. Can Pakistan succeed where two superpowers, the Soviet Union and the United States, have already failed? Can it really win a war against a force that has spent decades mastering its own home turf? The answer to that question is going to redefine the entire balance of power in South Asia. What do you think? What should India's next move be? Let me know what you're thinking down in the comments. Be sure to subscribe for the latest updates on the stories shaping our world, and make sure you watch the video that's appearing on your screen right now.